Hey folks, welcome back to K-Fix-It. Today on the bench we have an extension cord. It was brought over here by my buddy. He says that this end is not working right, so I've already loosened these screws up here, and we're going to take it apart and see why it's not working. Of course, it's not plugged in. Here's the other end of the cord. We want to make sure that safety first. It's always nice to get something on the bench that's what I consider to be easy to work on and easy to fix. And so when we take this thing apart, so the first thing was to take the 3 screws loose here, loosen up the screws that sort of pinch down on the cable, give some strain relief to the cable. And as you can see, the white, or what I call the common wire, has come off. So, and then there's a lot of this support threads in here that's made of Kevlar probably. And so pretty big mess inside there. So let's take this thing apart and let's put it back together right. So I'm going to take off this cable or loosen it up enough. Yeah, I don't know how this thing wasn't shorting out with each other. So I may end up tinning these wires with some solder before I put them back in there. As you can see, this wire right here is, I don't know if you can see that or not, but that wire is also broken there. And so I'm going to, at least, I'll probably just cut it off here and then restrip some wire back and put this connector back on. I did buy a new connector just in case you need a new connector, but I can always take that back. Let's see, I dropped one of these screws on the floor. There we go. So let me get my soldering iron heating up. So this is one of my favorite soldering irons. This is a Weller. It's a WTCPT, and I guess the iron itself is a TC201T, but this is something that I got from my father-in-law, and I really enjoy using it. I do have a Hakko over here that you can adjust the temperature on it. This is just an on or off type soldering iron. So let me show you what I'm going to do here. Always keep a bottle of water up in the cabinet here, and I do it just for this. I was always taught to keep your tip clean on your soldering iron. It's always easier to solder with a clean tip, and to do that I like to use a wet sponge to do that. Now I do understand it, yeah, that sort of cools off the iron, but a little bit, but anyway, it's pretty much soaked in there. And so and what I do is I always leave solder on the tip. After I get finished using it, I'll flood the tip with solder, then I'll put it back into the holder. So you can see that tip has a lot of solder on it. And as it's heating up, this takes a little bit to heat up. You know, the new ones are almost there instantly. So as that's heating up, I'm going to cut this cable back and then strip off some for the cable. So I'm going to move this out of the way, put my soldering iron right over here, and I'll start stripping off here. I know some of you probably saying, you got to wipe that water off your bench. Yeah, there you go. We got it. Nothing to worry about. Well, have you ever went to your handy dandy toolbox and your wire strippers were gone? I do have a teenage son who him and his friends come over and play around sometime. I'm not blaming them for that, but it's always a good place to start. And I found them, and guess what? It was the last place that I put them, so I can't blame my son on that. So I'm going to cut these off. And I'm going to cut a little bit further back. Cut about 1 3/4, 2 inches off. I can always cut it to size, and this is like a 50-foot deal anyway, so it's not like it's an inch or two is going to hurt it. So just barely nick it, and then these cables are, let me get a razor right quick. Of course, there's different ways of doing this. The way I found is easiest is just put some pressure on the cable itself, and then just touch it. Don't saw with it. Just touch it with the razor, and it starts to open up. See that? I didn't saw it at all. I just touched it. So the stress from the bending the cable and just touching it with the razor will open it up. And do that all the way around. And what that does, it helps you from cutting any of the wires inside. So see, now I've got that sheath cut all the way around. And let's go in and let's trim back all of this Kevlar. That's some pretty hefty stuff right there. I didn't like the way it was just laying in there last time. So one thing is that this particular design doesn't allow a lot of room between the tip where you cut it off and where the sheath starts. So it's very limited in space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave about maybe a ½ inch of wire. It's going to take about a ½ inch to span those without touching each other. So I'm going to take off the sheathing down to about or leave about a ½ inch visible on that. Maybe a little more. And I always start a little bit bigger on my strippers just in case, because when you're dealing with stranded wire, just like this right here, you're dealing with stranded wire. Guess what? If you use the wrong size, you'll end up cutting some of your strands off. And so I'm not going to worry about this particular one because that was just one strand, and I'm okay with that. I'm going to go ahead and twist that together. I'm going to be a little bit more careful on the common and the hot side. And I'm going to go one more bigger and see if that helps out. So that was too big because it didn't cleanly cut and get all the way around, but the covering on the cable is soft enough that I can just pull it and get it out of the way, you know, so that I don't have to risk cutting it with my cutters. There we go. And I'll do the same for this. What I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to end up soldering these, and it feels sort of gummy. So I'll show you how to remedy that, because you want your solder to be, you want your solder to adhere as best it can. And so to do that, sometimes you've got to aid it in doing that. All right, so that worked perfectly. So what I did is I just went to the next size up and just closed my strippers. Then I moved to the bigger size and got exactly where I went around it and then pulled the sheathing off of it. So there's our 3 conductors, and let's see if we can get those tinned up. Now here's what I like to do is, come over here. I've got these little helping hands is what I like to call them. And basically it just helps you hold the wire where you can get to it. Good third hand right there. These things are a dime a dozen, but they're worth $1 million if you know what I mean. So the solder I'm using is going to have some rosin in it. It's going to be a rosin core solder, and so, but I'm going to go ahead and put some more flux on there, and just because I can feel that this wire is pretty sticky. I don't know if it's because of the way it was being used or what, or if that's just the nature of that wire. Pretty old cable too, so I'm going to just add some of this. It's a mildly activated rosin, so let's get that on there. And I'm being pretty generous with it. You don't have to be this generous, but I like to be generous. And you want to make sure that you're in a well-ventilated place. It's, you know, it's you don't want to be breathing this stuff once the soldering iron gets a hold of it. So if you look at my soldering iron, remember I told you I put that stuff on the tip, and I cleaned that off. See that big blob come off of there? I want to show you something. Look how clean that tip is. That's really going to help out when you're doing soldering, have a clean tip. And yeah, it cooled down just a little bit as I'm rolling it over that, but it didn't cool down too much. So I'm going to start by just putting a little bit of solder on the gun, on the soldering gun itself. And as you can see, it's now made great connection with the cable. And what I'm looking for is I'm looking for it to flow. Can you see? I'm not putting solder on my gun. I'm up on the cable and it's running down the cable. So I'm getting good flow out of that. So I don't know if you can see that. Then I run my gun up and down the cable and it gets good flow. Now with the smoke that you see, is that flux coming off of there, rosin, whatever you want to call it. I call it flux. And that's the flux coming off of the cable. And I put a little bit on the tip just so I can get good connection with whatever I'm soldering with. Otherwise, you just got a little bitty tip connection there. And as you can see, as I tinned that, some of the sheathing melted back, and that's okay because it's still going to be good for us. So I'm trying to make this where you guys can see it. I'm going to do the white wire now. Let me turn that a little bit. Maybe you can see that. And so I'm going to clean off my gun. Remember, it's always nice to have a clean tip. So there's my clean tip. And I'm using a real thin solder. I like thin solder. I know that some of you may comment, well, your solder's too small. Well, that's fine. I'm okay with small solder. So what I'm doing is I'm getting solder on the tip of my gun. I'm worried about the tip of my gun making contact with what I'm trying to solder. So now I've got good contact with it. Now look, I'm going way up the conductor here. Can you see that? And it's flowing from the conductor down to the soldering gun. So the nature of solder is it will flow to the hottest point, if that makes sense. So I'm keeping my soldering gun as far back on the cable as I can. And you don't want it all as far back as, you know, you're killing the sheath and melting the sheath or anything like that. But one of the tricks of soldering is that solder will flow to the hottest point. And so I keep the hottest point either down low or up high, however you want to do it, and then start on the opposite end and let it flow to it, if that makes sense. We'll show that one more time. So there's the green wire. I don't know how well you can see that. So I've already got, let me move this out of the way. Let me make sure you can see that. Yeah, I think you can. So we've already got some flux on the cable itself, and then we're going to tin this up. And again, I'm going to clean the tip off my soldering iron, and I'm going to put a little bit of solder on there because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create a surface area between the tip of my soldering iron and what I am soldering, which is that copper conductor. And once you get that, get it touching that area, you'll start to see it smoke, and then you can move your solder up. See, it's starting, my solder is already flowing from here. So I'm not anywhere near my soldering iron. So you know that solder is flowing through that cable. Yeah, I've got nervous Nellies over here. So there we go. And you can see now that as I'm moving up and down this wire, it's all flowing to the gun itself. You can smooth it out by running your gun up and down it like that. And you can see how nice and smooth that is. So at this point, I'm finished soldering. So I'm going to clean off my soldering tip. And then watch this. I'm going to just load it up. I'm going to load it up and turn it as I go. I want that tip full of solder, pretty much covered completely with solder. Not to the point that it drips off on your table or anything like that. I'm going to put it carefully, put it back in my holder, and I'm going to turn it off. And what's going to happen is when that soldering iron cools down, the solder is going to protect that tip. I tell you, that's almost a pet peeve of mine, is to have dirty tips on your soldering iron. I see a lot of guys online, and I don't comment on that because I know that they do way, way, way more work than I do. So, and if they're good with a dirty tip, I am too. So, all right. So now we've got the cable, and our connector looks good. It's not in bad shape at all. There's some arcing you can see where the cable, when it came loose, it arced a little bit, but it's in good shape. I'm going to actually put the cable back on this side over here. And so I'm going to cut those to length. I'm going to leave about maybe 1/4 of an inch to put down in there. And that doesn't seem like a lot, but once we get it in there and get it cinched down, it'll be plenty. So those cables have cooled off, and I'm going to cut them to the length here. So the rosin is on there. You can take some alcohol and wipe that off, and I'll show you what that looks like. So I use 100% isopropyl, and it seems to do a good job. All right. So I've left about 1/4 of an inch on each of those. I probably cut a little bit too much off of the white one there, but we'll make it work. All right, so just to show you, I have some 100%. Let me get it. Keep all my chemicals in a cabinet, but I have some, this is 99.9% pure isopropyl alcohol, and it says it's made for electronics cleaning. Always, if you're cleaning up electronics, or if you're cleaning up flux off a board or whatever, you want to test this in an area to make sure it's not going to lift off the silk screening on the board or anything like that. But I found that this works pretty good, and I have some in a little squirt bottle here. I have a bunch of these little squirt bottles. They come with looks like a hypodermic needle, but it's not. So I'm going to clean off the ends of these wires here, and you don't have to worry about the alcohol. It'll evaporate fairly quickly. And that does a good job taking that flux off. I used a dirty rag, in case you're wondering. I was cleaning my bench off earlier, but I'm trying to use a clean portion of the rag. Okay, so there we go. I've got my conductors free, and then basically I'm just going to follow the color pattern on the outlet itself. So if you don't have a color pattern, when you look at this, of course, the ground lug is this sort of horseshoe-shaped lug right here, and it's in the back of this one. It's green. So basically, you put green to green, and we'll start off with that one. I always like starting off. All right. So when you're doing this, make sure that you already have the back end of your plug on there. Otherwise, you got to take it all off and put it back on. So especially if you're putting a new one on, that goes on first. So I don't know if you can see that, but I cut just enough off so that when I put it in there, there is no wire sticking beyond the connector itself, so it'd be awful hard for these wires to touch each other. And then I've got the right size bit. This takes a square bit, and I'm going to cinch down on that. I don't know what those square bits are called. They may be called Robertson bits. I'm not sure. Maybe tell me by commenting below. So I am not crimped on the sheath at all. That's I'm only crimped on the part that I soldered there. So when you look at the cable, typically green is ground, white is common, and black is hot. And so when you look at a plug in the US, ground is the horseshoe-shaped one, common is the bigger plug, and hot is the smaller one. So on this plug, you can tell that this side, the left side, is bigger. So that's going to be the common, and that's where I'm going to connect my white wire. And so this was the wire that was loose before. And as you can see, there's a little burning on this side. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it to the other side because the connector is still very good. And I'm going to raise that up. And I'm going to put that in there. Actually, it's not bad at all, so I'm going to put it in there. There we go. Okay, so I got the white one in there. Let me tighten that up. Now I'm really cinching down on that because, you know, at the end of an extension cable gets a lot of abuse. You know, if you're using it like on a yard tool or something, you're yanking on it to drag it around the yard or whatever, it gets a lot of pressure put on that end. And so that's why the string release at the end is very important to have that cinched down. It's also important to have it tightened up here at the connector also. So here's the black one. I'm going to put it in. And I'm going to tighten that up. Again, you don't want to get the sheathing under there, because the sheathing will add a gap between the conductor and the set. So you want to make sure that's that way. All right, so there it is. There's our plug. As you can see, there's no stray wires anywhere. It's on there pretty good. So now we're going to put her back together, and you can tell that it only goes one way back in here, and it goes in there this way. So what I'm going to do is I am going to tighten up to make sure that the sheath of the cable itself, the yellow part, is held on to good. I'm going to move it up to the location to where I want it to hold, and I'm going to, even though this is not all the way in there yet, I'm going to tighten this down. So I can see, and you can see right here, that the sheath is still in a good position to be tightened down, and we're very close to having it in place to screw into place. So you want to make sure that you have it lined up, because you don't want to be wrestling with this thing. So, all right, so that's it, and I'm going to tighten up these. Like I say, this is just something I'm piddling with. I can't say that I've done this more than once or twice in my life, but if you've done this and there's a little bit easier way or better way to do it, let me know by commenting below. And I'd like to see the feedback from you guys. It lets me know that you're enjoying the program. And I don't like when people say, click and subscribe, so I'm not going to do that, even though that might have been a little bit subliminal, but you know what I mean. I'm going to make sure that this is good and tight. This is the trick of the whole thing, is making sure that this strain release for the cable, this makes sure that this cable doesn't pull against the connectors inside. And so we're going to make sure we got it good and tight. And when we first brought it over here, these were a little bit loose, and I guess that contributed to it big time. So you're going to see the connector itself is flanged out. And the one way you can test this is that you can pull. Yeah, that's not moving at all. So, and I pulled on that pretty hard. So now we want to get this back into place. I've got it lined up. And we're going to put our screws in. And our screws, what our screws will do, as they go in, they'll start setting the cables in place. So there's plenty of room for that to take place. And they use the same square Robertson bit, I believe is what it's called. I might be totally wrong about that, but I think that's it. Okay, so I need to actually push down a little further. There we go. I am pushing in on that just a little bit. This is an older connector. All right, so I don't have it lined up with a hole. I can hardly see. There we go. Maybe that's it. Yeah, it's going somewhere. That's good. So so far that's been the hardest part of the thing, is getting that lined up with a hole. Now that the first one's lined up, the next two should be fairly easy. And I'm not seating it all the way yet. I'm making sure that I can get all the other ones started. And that's pretty much in anything that you do, is you don't drive something all the way home. You get the other one started before you do that, because you may have to move it around, just like this one right here. It may have to move just a tad to make it work. Yeah, that one's going. All right, let's get this one in there. Trying not to do that. I don't know if you can see it. Now that I've got all three of them lined up, I'm sort of like tightening a wheel on a car. Sort of go around the rosy until it seats evenly. Otherwise, you're going to have it all wonker jawed, is what we call it around here. You don't want it wonker jawed. If you're watching from a different country, I know there's a lot of people from different countries that watch my videos. If you're watching from a different country, and you can leave a comment, let me know what country you're watching from. I've been to several places in my lifetime. I've been to Russia a couple times, and the places in between here and there that it takes to get there. So, I've been to Canada, but just on a quick vacation, one day deal. Never been to Mexico. Been to the Bahamas, of course, on maybe a cruise or two. But I'd love to go up around Nova Scotia, places like that. So I think I've got this about as good as I'm going to get it. And let's test it out. So I'm going to plug this into the cable in. I've got empty space on my bench here. Y'all can hear the crows. I got my garage door opened and the crows are flying by. So let me get some test leads and we'll test some voltages here. Okay, I'm back. All right, so let's see here. I don't know if you can hear that in the background too. I live close to a baseball field and a football field, and they're always over there playing baseball and football, whatever. All right, so we're going to be, let me just, all right, so I got a little Rigo meter here, a little bench meter. I'm gonna put on AC voltage because that's what we're gonna be testing. It's coming out of the wall. When I plugged it in, nothing started burning or anything like that, so that's pretty cool. Let me see if these are long enough to get down, if my test probes are long enough to get down in there. All right, so sometimes these tips come off, but these don't. I may have to get a different set of probes. All right, so yeah, it's not long enough to go down in there. Let me get another set of probes real quick. Okay, I'm back. I got an old trusty Fluke 77 over there. If you got a little handheld meter, I've had that Fluke 77 since about 1988. I don't know how long it's been around, but I'm telling you, that has been a good little meter. I've carried it in my bag every day. Let me show it to you. So this little meter is over 30 years old. This little Fluke 77. It's still a very trustworthy meter. In fact, let's turn the bench meter off since we got her out. And we're using her probes anyway. Let's use her. I've got it set on AC voltage right there, and let's test the AC voltage. So what we're going to do is we're going to test across the common and the hot right now. So I'm going to put my black in the common and put my red in the hot. And as you can see, we've got I don't know if you can see that. Let me move the camera over. Yeah, you can see that. Let's see if I got to make good contact. Got 124.5 volts right there. All right, so now I'm going to test between common and ground. You should have 0 volts. And that lets you know if the wiring in your house is done correctly or if you got a floating ground or anything like that. If you ever have problems, look for a floating ground. So between common and ground, I have 0.03 volts. That's acceptable. I would say if you get over a volt and a half, some of the places I've worked had tolerances of half a volt across ground. You had to get the folks in there and redo your ground. But this is 0.03 volts across ground. Very good. Now what we're going to do, so we had 124 volts across hot and common, so you should also have 124 volts across hot and ground. And so let's look at that. You should have the same voltage, or the two voltages should add up. So it should be like 0.3 less or whatever, 0.03 less, 124.5, and there we go. So this cable is working excellent, and I will get that back to my friends. Thanks for tuning in today, and appreciate you guys tuning in. Let me know where you're watching from. I'd like to hear more from you. Have a good day, and hope you get things fixed right. Thanks for tuning in to Cake Fix It.